I have no plans to give you anything whatsoever, Pastor. Man, I'm glad to see you folks. What a tremendous conference this has been. My thanks to the Wyldwood Baptist Church. What marvelous hosts. It has been a joy for me to see and be part of from many different angles. When we began to talk about starting the King James Bible Research Council, and by the way, we know it's a very unwieldy name. David Brown and I came up with names for hours and then looked for Googled them and found there was already somebody with that name. I wanted a one-word name, but we got what we got. But we wanted to have something that would accomplish some specific goals. Sometimes the defense of the King James Bible is hurt the most by the folks who claim to be defending it. Some people teach foolish doctrines that there's not a line about in the King James Bible in the name of the King James Bible. And we wanted to avoid that kind of extremism. Some folks defend the King James Bible with an attitude that creates more harm than it does good. We wanted to avoid that. Some people, very frankly, defend the King James Bible with very good material, but are very boring and difficult to listen to. And we wanted to avoid that. And we consciously tried to draw some men together that had the right spirit, that knew what they were doing. They brought different skills to this with the idea that we could be of help to folks. And my heart has been so encouraged, and I encourage you. We've got about 15 folks now that, for lack of a better term, you could call a speaker's bureau that you could have in your church or in your ministry, and they would not hurt you. They would help you. And I encourage folks to think about all that. Well, I understand there's something important going on you all want to hear about on television tonight. The Pacers-Bucks game. Yeah. And as somebody who grew up in Indianapolis, I want to get that too. But no, I will be brief, and normally it means nothing when an independent Baptist says that, but on this one occasion, I will actually mean it. I'm making no promises for any of the moment. You hear this all the time, so people just can't understand the King James Bible. We'd be so much more biblically literate. We could have revival. Our folks would come to our church, but they just can't understand the King James Bible. Oh, if somebody would give us an understandable Bible. Do you know this is not a new thought? Since 1611, there have been over 1,000 English translations of the New Testament or the whole Bible. You couldn't list them all. Let me just share a few of them with you. There was the Mace Testament, 1729. A Unitarian pastor put it out so that you could make the fact that Jesus was not God clear to people. It soon went out of print. The Whiston Testament, William Whiston, was the fellow who translated Josephus, and his translation of Josephus is still in print almost 200 years later. Well, most folks don't know is he also translated the New Testament so that people could finally understand the Bible. His New Testament lasted less than 2 years. His Josephus has lasted almost 200 years. There's the Purver Bible. He spent 30 years translating the Bible, published it in 1764. And his Bible was known as the Quaker Bible, but after he spent 30 years translating it, it went out of print in less than 3 years. John Wesley translated the New Testament in 1755. He actually used the received text, but he thought that he provided better English than was in the King James Bible. But he couldn't get the Methodists to buy it. And it soon went out of print. Moody Press, for some reason, republished it in 1938 as if this was a great discovery, the Wesley translation of the New Testament. But they only did one printing because nobody would buy it. Edward Harwood in 1768, also Unitarian, he entitled his translation, A Liberal Translation of the New Testament. One printing. Wakefield New Testament, Unitarian pastor Gilbert Wakefield, soon out of print. Tobias translation 1795 by Mr. Elias, soon out of print. The Woodruff Testament in 1852 by Hezekiah Woodruff, soon out of print. The Norton Gospels were released in 1855. And this translation promised to remove the many obstacles to right understanding found in the King James Bible, and help make biblical truth clearer every time you saw the word repent, they translated it as reform. It is soon out of print. Sawyer New Testament, from the Greek text of Tischendorf, which was the rage at this time. But it was soon forgotten. The Thorn New Testament, 1861, Leonard Thorn claimed that spirits came to him to help him correct the translation of the Bible. Now relax. According to him, these were not black spirits which were evil. These were white spirits that could be trusted. And so they produced a translation of the Bible. Very few copies. One printing, it was gone. There was the Young Bible in 1862 by Robert Young. Young is the compiler of Young's Concordance. His concordance of the King James Bible has been continuously in print for almost 150 years. His translation died quickly. And if you read his biography in the concordance, they won't even tell you that he did a translation of the Bible. It made no impact whatsoever. There was the Mormon Bible in 1867 from the reorganized Latter-day Saints, and they couldn't get even their own people to accept it. The Noyes New Testament, again, it was Tischendorf, and it was going to solve all the problems. One printing. Are you noticing a trend? Translation after translation has been released that was going to replace the King James Bible. I'll come back to give you some more examples in just a moment. But before I do, I'd like to share with you 10 things I think we can learn from this mass of Bible translations. Number one, newness is not a qualification for a Bible translation. So people treat Bible translations like it's brand new, it's just off the press, it's just in the bookstores, it's just in front of the churches. This is incredible, this is wonderful, this is great. We act like it's a new phone. Okay? People wait in line for new phones because new phones are supposed to have so many wonderful new features. And we treat Bible translations, we don't, but lots of folks treat Bible translations that way. But newness is not a qualification for a Bible translation. How do you know the Bible translation lives up to its advertisement? The translators and the publishers will always tell you that it's going to replace the King James Bible. But you might need to wait for a while to see whether that actually happens. Here's a second thing you might learn. The King James Bible is the standard for all Bible translations are judged by. Nobody comes along and says we have a brand new Bible that's going to replace the NIV. We have a brand new Bible and it's going to replace the Wesley Testament. We have a brand new Bible and it's going to replace, pick your example. What's the one Bible that every one of them is compared by? They come along and say, it'll replace the King James Bible. You understand it's not hard to replace all these Bibles that are out of print. Here's the third thing you can learn. There'll always be another new Bible translation around the corner. So you just got finished realizing what was wrong with this one and talking about it and exposing it, and it goes away. Just relax. There is another new one coming right away. Here's the fourth thing you can learn. Predictions of the soon demise of the King James Bible are a dime a dozen. Some years ago, I came across a book by a fellow named Dewey Beagle. And Dewey Beagle was talking about how the King James Bible was fading out of existence. It would soon be gone. In fact, he said by the year 2000, he said if you want a King James Bible, if you have some emotional attachment to it, he said you'd better get one now. He said by the year 2000, there'll be no King James Bibles in print. So you better get one to save if you want to keep sake for your children or something. In fact, he suggested, he wrote a book called The Word of God in English, I have it at home. He suggested that the King James Bible, there would never be one Bible again, but it would be replaced by 3 Bibles. Suggested it would be replaced by the Weymouth Bible, the Goodspeed Bible, and the Moffat Bible. Do you know what in the year 2000 the Weymouth Bible, the Goodspeed Bible, and the Moffat Bible all had in common? They were out of print. And if you wanted one, you had to find it in a used bookstore somewhere. Predictions of the soon demise of the King James Bible are a dime a dozen. Number 5, no translation has ever been produced with the qualifications of the King James Bible. Do you understand translation after translation after translation has been done by one person, and even when on occasion that one person had some signs of scholarship that showed up in some other project, it meant nothing when they got to Bible translation. They were in way over their heads. Number 6, the King James Bible is not easily replaced. Number 7, some individuals have such a strong ego they think they can do a better job of Bible translation than the team of experts assembled for the King James Bible project. Somebody sitting at their desk, most of them people you have never heard of under any circumstance, saying, you know, I could do a better job than that. I mean, it's no big deal. They were a bunch of guys. They weren't very smart. They didn't know that much. I could do a better job than that. And they spend years on a Bible translation that will fade so quickly and be forgotten so completely. But they actually thought they could do that. Number 8, so-called older and better manuscripts do not produce more popular and effective Bibles. Number 9, the source text of a translation project matters. Number 10, translation procedures matter. Let me see if I can illustrate that just a little bit more. You have the Rotherham Bible in 1872. This claimed to accurately translate the Bible based upon the original Greek as discovered by Westcott and Hort. It has an explanation in the front that, Westcott and Hort have reassembled the original Greek New Testament, and now they've got a translation of the reassembled original Greek New Testament, and people can finally have the words of God. Of course, it faded out of existence very quickly. The Smith Bible in 1876 was by Miss Julia Smith. She spent 7 years making a new translation. She emphasized the Latin Vulgate as an authority. Little single lady, working diligently in her study at home, trying to rescue people from that out-of-date, unusable, incalculable King James Bible. And so in 7 years, she translated the Latin Vulgate into English. This is going to come as a shock. It didn't sell. There was the Hanson New Testament by J.W. Hanson. Came and went. The Dillard New Testament. This was designed to be a translation that would speak to the hearts of the poor, illiterate, and unlearned. Apparently there weren't that many poor, illiterate, and unlearned people because it faded quickly. The Spurl Old Testament in 1885 by Miss Helen Spurl, she used the Septuagint to correct the King James Bible, Old Testament. She just went through, and everywhere that the King James and the Septuagint didn't match, which turned out to be thousands and thousands of places, she used the Septuagint to correct the King James and announced to the world you now had a corrected King James Bible. It was quickly forgotten. Weeks Testament, same thing, man. Westcott and Hort was finally out. You could finally have the Word of God. It came and went. Farrar Fenton Bible in 1900 by Farrar Fenton. And he said his New Testament was translated from the accurate text of Westcott and Hort. And it's actually still in print over 100 years later. However, the people that use it are the Christian identity cult. And they did something Fenton never did. They added a 29th chapter to the book of Acts. And just coincidence, which they said was in the original but had been lost, but they had recovered it. That was impressive effort on their part. And just coincidentally, you can prove Christian identity doctrine out of Acts chapter 29. And nowhere else, not even in the Fenton Bible. But they keep it still in print. There was the 20th century New Testament in 1898. And it was by Mary Higgs, and it was designed to replace the hard-to-understand English of the King James Bible, because you understand in 1898, the English they said was archaic, and nobody could understand it, nobody could read it. It was praised by scholars, promoted all over the country, and soon went out of print. Moody Press did us the favor of reprinting it in 1961, but it only lasted for printing because nobody would buy it. There was the Way Epistles by A.S. Way. This was designed to convey the real meaning of the Scriptures that was obscured and hidden by the King James Bible. So you could finally get the truth. It stayed in print for about 25 years and then faded out of existence. There's the Godby Testament, 1902. It promised to replace the King James with a more accurate translation. Gone in a couple of years. Weymouth New Testament, which was going to be one of the real ones, the true ones. And it was rejected because it was so obviously modernistic. It was revised in 1924, revised in 1943, and 2 years after the gentleman said that it was going to replace the King James Bible, it went out of print. By the way, do you understand when every one of these Bibles is coming out and somebody's rushing to it, say, finally a Bible we can understand? That every day that one of these Bibles was released to replace the King James Bible, that on that day, millions of Christians in English-speaking countries around the world had their devotions out of the King James Bible and their heart blessed. Most of them never knew these new Bibles were released. It wasn't important enough to notice. And they weren't credentialed enough to last. There were more. There was the Moffat New Testament. It, again, sold for a while. It was going to remove biblical English. That was the big thing. No biblical English terms. And it was going to have all modern speech for the 1950s. It faded, but Moffat took many of his ideas to the Revised Standard Version. There was the Shorter Bible in 1921 by C.F. Kent. He was going to make the Bible more popular by eliminating everything that was repeated twice. He would take it out so it was only in there once, make the Bible shorter. And as a result of being shorter, it would be easier to read. And this was going to spark a revolution in Bible study. It had one printing. There's the Cunningham Testament in 1999 by E.E. Cunningham, one printing. There was the Ballantine Bible in 1922. It was advertised as a plainer Bible for plain people in plain America. It said one you could really understand. One printing. The Riverside Testament, which came from a different person named Ballantine. It was supposed to be the living English of today, but it didn't live long. There was the American translation by Goodspeed. And he said this was for the common American working man. He based his translation on Westcott and Hort, promised to remove all the archaic English. Boy, have times changed. In 1927, his translation was attacked by the Chicago Tribune for being too modernist. Was also attacked by the New York Times for being too liberal. And the London Tribune and the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. It was soon out of print, but he helped take the ideas included in it to the Revised Standard Version. Overby Testament, 1925, came and went. The Concordance Testament in 1926 by A.E. Knox. He had promised a consistent, emphasized English version. It was going to replace the King James. It lasted for 2 printings. Did y'all get the idea? The Tory Gospels in 1933, they promised this one would be accurate because it was based on Westcott and Hort, soon out of print. The Williams Testament in 1937. Westcott and Hort, they said, our aim is to make the greatest book in the world readable and understandable. Because, you know, for all those centuries and all those revivals and all the church planting and all the missions, you understand it wasn't readable or understandable. It stayed in print for almost 20 years. Its only claim to fame is that on occasion C.S. Lewis quoted it. And I have listed in the notes a whole bunch of other short-lived translations. But then you get some other, you have the Phillips version in 1958. J.B. Phillips was an English scholar, and he said he would free Christianity from the restraints of literal translation. He's going to set Christianity free with a new Bible translation that would replace the King James. He also says in his book, Ring of Truth, that he'd written C.S. Lewis a letter asking Lewis's advice on one particular translation. But Lewis died before he could answer the letter. He said he was sitting in the study by the fireside, working on the translation, when the ghost of C.S. Lewis came to him. And Lewis, being the considerably polite man that he was, did not want to go on to the glories of heaven without answering Phillips' letter. So according to Phillips, Lewis came as his last act before, floating on up into heaven, and sat with him for hours discussing Bible translation. Doesn't that make you want to run right out and buy this? By the way, for a while, evangelicals were using this thing. The first editions of Bill Gothard's Basic Youth Conflicts, the scriptures were from the Phillips New Testament. And see, when a guy tells you a story like that, there are three possibilities. The guy's crazy, in which case I don't really want him translating the Bible for me. The guy's a fraud and who for some strange reason made up this story, in which case I do not want him translating the Bible for me. Or number three, he thought he saw the ghost of C.S. Lewis and heard the ghost's voice, in which case it was a demon. And I really don't want him translating the Bible for me. And there was the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. This is not the original translation done by Charles Taze Russell, of course, but a translation done by later scholars, and then their translation was redone in 1981, and they promise you they use the Westcott and Hort Greek text. So that's the true one that God gave. And I've never met anybody that used it that was not a Jehovah's Witness. There was the New English Bible in 1961. There was such a push put on it, and they spent 24 years on it. It sold 7 million copies in 9 years, and then faded away. Jerusalem Bible, Roman Catholic Bible, one of its claims to fame is that one of the translators was J.R.R. Tolkien, of fame for his fiction. By 1985, it was no longer the replacement for the King James Bible because it had to be replaced by the New Jerusalem Bible. There was the Living Bible in 1971 from Kenneth Taylor. The Bible in his own words. What a blessing. You may never have heard of Kenneth Taylor, but now the Bible was in his words. It sold extremely well for a few years. However, as its 1970s slang faded, it went out of date and was replaced with the New Living Bible. And as that one faded, apparently they were embarrassed to call the next one the New Living Bible. So they began to come up with new names and to re-release it every few years with the slang updated. You know, you don't have to update the word propitiation. There was the Good News Bible, and man, you go to any used bookstore anywhere and they got a bunch of these. Because in the 1970s, 1973, number of ecumenical organizations came together and so we said, we want everybody in the United States to have a readable English Bible. And said, we're going to take one of these to every door in the United States in 1973. And according to their best efforts, they took a Bible to every door in the country, and this was supposed to spark the greatest revival in the history of the world. Of course, today the thing's not even in print. And I somehow missed the revival that was supposed to come out of it. There's so many more. And you can see in the notes there, they just go on and on. Everything from the Cotton Patch Bible. I frankly don't have a lot of information on that, but I confess the name has made me wonder what a Cotton Patch Bible really is. Did y'all get the point? People have been crying for not many of them, a handful of scholars have been crying for a new English Bible to replace the King James since the ink was still wet on the 1611. Over 1,000. When I first started this study, I was teaching this in college, and I thought I was going to do a paragraph on every English Bible ever printed. I thought that'd be good for the students to have in their notes. And I figured 100, 200, that's a lot of work. And so I began to collect them, and I thought I was going to have an individual file on each one. So I've got folders, and I'm writing the names on and putting the information in there. And by the time I got to 400, I was discouraged. And I decided no longer was I was going to produce a paragraph for each one, but at least make a list. When I got to 600, I said, how long does this go on? When I broke 1,000, I said, I no longer care how many English translations there are. I've got the idea. They come, they're offered to replace the King James Bible. They last sometimes very briefly, sometimes for a little while. They fade, they go away, and they're gone. And on the day they're released, there are millions of people having their devotions from a King James Bible. And on the day the last one is printed, there are millions of people having their devotions out of the King James Bible. Because you see, it's not so easy to replace. You say, well, boy, in recent years, the NIV has knocked it off the top. Look again, people that quote that statistic. In secular bookstores, the NIV, for a few years, outsold the King James. But really, where do most people that you know get their King James Bibles in our day and age? Where did you get yours? They get them from branches of bearing precious seed and groups and organizations like that. And that's where most of our folks get their Bibles, and they don't show up in those statistics. For a while, people said the NIV's finally knocked it off the top of the perch, but then you got to the place where the King James was number one again, even in secular bookstores. But I said, well, the NIV, it was going to be the one that was going to stick. But now the NIV fades drastically because it's been replaced by the English Standard Version. And the ESV, and that's the big deal today, is the ESV. The editor of that lives in the Chicago area. He's a gracious man to talk to. We have communicated. And his big thing, and he's written 3 books on literal translation. And so the big thing of the ESV is it's the most literal translation of the critical text that exists. Well, I'm a literal translation guy when you're translating the right text. Do you know what happens when you have the most literal possible translation of the most corrupt possible text? You get the worst possible English Bible. But it is the big deal for the moment. It's interesting. I had written, and I'll close with this just a moment, Pastor. I had written something, and I'd made the statement in this writing that it's amazing to me that bus kids can handle the King James Bible, but seminary professors can't. And that apparently upset some people. It apparently didn't upset any bus kids, it upset some seminary professors. And so I was taking some heat over that statement. And he actually wrote an article defending me. We'd never met. He wrote an article. He said, I was a little boy, 10 years old. We came from Norway. Dad said we had to start using English. We started having devotions in the King James Bible. He said, I never found the King James Bible hard to understand. Let me say, I appreciate him writing to defend me. But I confess it led to a question. If a 10-year-old Norwegian immigrant is not having trouble understanding the King James Bible, why do we need to replace it? And so the Bible of the day is the ESV. But can I confess something to you? I've quit keeping track what the Bible of the day is. Because I no longer learn what it is. And I used to think the Bible of the day, I've got to examine this, I've got to be able to deal with it, I've got to be able to explain it, I've got to be able to refute it. And I mean, over the years, I have refutations of the New American Standard and the New King James and the NIV. But the trouble is, as soon as you study them and you get the refutation all down, they're gone and replaced by something new. So very frankly, I don't pay much attention anymore to the Bible of the day. It comes, it's here, it's gone. Can I suggest it's something like ladies' hairstyles? There comes a moment when this is the style, this is the big deal. All the ladies are talking, but can I confess, even when it's my wife talking about the hairstyle of the day, I sort of tune it out. Because I know this. The hairstyle of the day will not be the hairstyle of tomorrow. And so there's no point in my learning what it is because it will soon be gone. Men understand better than the ladies. I can see it by looking at you. I've sort of come to that with the Bible of the day. I could spend a lot of time researching and finding its weak points and knowing how to refute it. But if I did, I mean, you know how often I use my outlines now about what's wrong with the Revised Standard Version? It just never comes up anymore. Or I have a really good outline about what's wrong with the New American Standard Bible, but I haven't used it in years because that faded so far into the background. The Bible of the day, not such a big deal. The Bible of the ages that lasted through the first decade and the second decade and the third decade and through the first century and through the second century. When people were saying it was outdated and archaic and no one could understand it and the English was too old-fashioned, made it through the second century to the third century and had celebrations all over the United States because a Bible lasting for 300 years. It's incredible. But even in some of the celebrations, they remarked, no Bible's ever lasted this long, so there's never going to be anything like the 300th anniversary again. And guess what? We lived through the 400th anniversary celebration. And I have a sneaking suspicion there are a lot of folks that this has to be the last one. And it's entirely possible. I really enjoyed speaking on the 400th anniversary and appreciate so much the opportunity that Brother Doug and Brother Jason arranged for me to speak in Washington, D.C. on the 400th anniversary. But I'm afraid I won't get to speak at the 500th anniversary. I expect to be here. I think they'll be dead and gone by then. They'll be past history. But you know what I'm not worried about? I'm not worried about whether this will be gone. Because it's not new. It has stood the most vicious criticism, the organized attacks. It has stood the opposition of thousands of seminaries and dozens of denominations. And the seminaries come, and when they close, one of the seminaries that's been such a leading critic of the King James Bible just closed last spring. I knew the president. He's actually a former student of mine. I knew him when he took a King James position. I don't know what happened along the way. But the day that seminary that had spent so much time talking about how the King James Bible was outdated and was of no more use and was fading away, the day that seminary faded away, millions of people were still having their devotions that day out of the King James Bible. So I'm not worried about the Bible of the day anymore. I've learned some things from the Bible of the day. The Bible of the day does not replace the Bible of the ages.